Great. We are streaming live on Facebook now. Hello, my name is Amber McLaren. I am with you tonight for the Gifted Support Group by IEA, or the Institute for Educational Advancement. We have a program tonight where we're going to be answering questions that were pre-submitted to us in a questionnaire form earlier. Cynthia Molt, who is not only a teacher with the Academy program here at IEA, she is an individual who has extensive experience working in the Pasadena school system, working as an administrator, a curriculum developer, a teacher. She's really covered a lot of facets of what we're going to be discussing tonight. We saw a trend in parent questions that really hit three key areas. One area was let me pull up my notes so I can read this correctly. One area is how to motivate your kids and how to manage frustration. Another area that we got a lot of questions in is district management of GATE, and we'll touch on that as well. I do want to acknowledge that depending on your district, your state, even down to your school principal, this answer can be very different. So we'll talk about it as it relates to us locally, and then also some generic broad resources. And the third one is resources. So we'll get to that as much as we can. I want to encourage you, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Zoom with us, please feel free to submit your questions. If we have a chance to address those, we'll be addressing those as well. And unlike previous gifted support groups, we'll be staying on this webinar tonight. We will not be transitioning to a different platform. So settle in, we'll be here for the duration of the hour. Again, please feel free to submit your questions. If you prefer to do it anonymously, you're more than welcome to do that as well. And without further ado, Cynthia, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Hello, good evening, everybody. It is a sincere, wonderful pleasure to be with you this evening. I'm sure you're here from coast to coast. I'm here in Southern California, grew up here, and been an educator for almost 30 years. As Amber mentioned, I've worked in and out of the classroom, written curriculum, and I myself have been a twice exceptional child. In the days of yore, there were no resources at all for gifted students or those with a hyperactivity issue as I had. My mother had nowhere to specifically turn to in resources. Her reaction was to change school to school to school. So from grades kindergarten through 12th grade, I attended 7 different schools. The perfect school was never found. Has it affected me? I'm sure that it has. I have varied interests. I still struggle with keeping my mind on one task at a time. I tend to multitask 3, 4, or 5 different things at the same time and never let one phase me over the other. So it has been a struggle throughout adulthood. But has it affected me in the long run? No. I graduated college. I went on to work on many different levels, and it's been useful to school districts and so forth. I will just speak to this, that I have worked in the Pasadena Unified School District, and IEA was training GATE teachers at the time that I was part of the GATE program at Pasadena Unified. So without going any further with the personal perspective, I believe, Amber, I think we'll start with the slides, if that's okay, if that's all right, or do you want to go with the questions? Either way. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, this article is from Education Sciences. And this particular article is an amalgam of 20 years worth of research an understanding of what is GATE. And to give you clarification, prior to 2020, from the year 2000 to 2020, there were literally one strand, one thought, one idea articles that came out on GATE. And most of them focus on the deficiencies of the program. As you well know, and each of you well know, that have a gifted child in your care and who you love dearly, the GATE programs are lacking out there. They either don't exist, or you become placated of yes, we're going to do something. Yes, we're going to train teachers. Yes, we'll offer enrichment classes. None of that ever happens. The other frustration that all the strands of articles from 2000 to 2020 bring up is that the teachers aren't trained and so forth. So all those deficiencies, all those extraneous ideas and intrinsic ideas about what is GATE are put together in this one beautiful article that looks very technical, and I will just highlight some of the points in it. It is, and mainly why I picked it, for two reasons. I didn't just pick the first article I saw. I picked it for a specific reason. And the specific reasons were this. I wanted to see if anything had come out, the most recent research, number one. And on top of that, I wanted to see if anything new had occurred. And to my chagrin, nothing new has happened in twice exceptionality. And it was your questions on twice exceptionality that led me to this article. And myself being a child with this, I was never identified, but I have all the earmarks and all the criteria that goes with a 2E kid. So on the article, in the introduction, and I'm just going to hit some basic points about it, it mentions the worldwide trend toward inclusive education has focused on students with a wide range of disabilities. You have heard, and you know, being a parent, that giftedness is part of special ed. Why that is not set aside from the disability aspect of what affects a child and the exceptionality of the intellect, I have no idea how that is considered one and the same. They are both different. Anyway, it mentions that disabilities being educated in the mainstream schools, but has not so far been overlooked, who have various gifts or talents in addition to their disabilities. So they just identified what you already know. And in the second paragraph in the introduction, it mentions twice exceptional learners are students who demonstrate the potential for high achievement or creative productivity, or more domains such as math, science, technology, or social or visual, spatial, performing arts, or other areas of human productivity. Again, just a definition. Toward the end of the page, and the last paragraph that you see in the article that is displayed on your screen, it says a useful model for twice exceptional children highlights the relationship between disability, social, cultural environment, and abilities. To this day, and I'm speaking from personal experience as an educator, and I'm speaking from experience as a person who has a 2E personality, character, or whatever, there is more. There's been a severe deficiency on helping the environment for the gifted child who may have a disability. I'll tell you one case in point. In the years that I was at PUSD, about 2005, 2003, etc., they had the gifted program, they had the training for teachers, but they had no classes. They would only include and note the giftedness of a child on the cum or the cumulative record of a student. They would also note it on when a student had a disability that is identified, and they would then note also gifted. Students who don't have the 2E and are just gifted, it's only in their cum, and there's no avenue for those students that are not twice exceptional. So there's a focus on disability with a 2E child, and then there's the focus of nothing on a student that should have classes that has no disability. There's no classes offered to them. Okay, on the next page, which is, it mentions in the second paragraph under gifted and talented, it says typically gifted and talented education is not considered to fall within the realm of special education. Yet in most school districts, it is. But in order to examine education for twice exceptional students, aspects of this need to be clarified. So they're even admitting after 20 years of scholarly articles that there's still a need to separate these two areas and dynamics. Then it goes on to say, the next line that says, such as those who are, such as who the gifted are and who the talented are, and how do we meet the needs of gifted and talented children? They're putting the question forth, ladies and gentlemen, right to you. They don't know. They aren't doing it. You have become the resource for your child. You are the focus of their world to find that kind of education to help them with their frustrations, their needs, their talents. Then it mentions under AIM, which is what this article was written for, it says what research methodologies were used in the studies, which I highlighted briefly just a moment ago. And what they did, how they studied what has been done for gifted education, is they gathered a systematic review of recent literature, which I mentioned. And on the next page, which looks very complicated, but it's not, I just put it down to 2 words there. What excludes a student? And then step 2 at the bottom, this is a collection of 23 articles over a 20-year period of time. These were read, and after assessing for eligibility, 8 articles were eliminated because they did not address the question. So moving on to the next page, it says the data collection and analysis. So they analyzed each and every article that they used in the study. So I am not going to read each of those studies. If you wish to peruse those, and they are available online to delve into further. And so I'm going to skip a couple of the pages because they're all reviews of the articles that they reviewed for this particular study. And then on page 8, it mentions, in some studies, students' statements suggested that their school environments were flawed. This may be where some of the questions sprang from that came to us at IEA regarding how your students are behaving, how they're motivated, how they're not motivated. When you have a 2E exceptional child, so many components have to work together. You have their teacher or teachers, their coaches, their extracurricular programs, the media they interact with, the social environment they react with, their friends that they react with. All those components are integrated into one human being, your child. The one thing I will mention too is that as this statement mentions, it says that the school environments were flawed. I'll just speak again from personal experience. I liked having my friends. I enjoyed the company of my classmates and so forth. But I also was very hypersensitive to all their maybe slights of how I was at the time, the way maybe I wasn't cool like they wanted me to be. I was a standalone person. So there was no one at the school to address how I was treated. So my mother would see how that was occurring in the classroom environment, and I would be moved on to another school. To the point, as I mentioned, it happened at the end 7 times by grade 12. And then it mentions in the next, close to the next sentence, it says many twice exceptional students have reported dissatisfaction in their overall school experiences. I'll just contrast it with what happened in my life, and that is school was the best part of my life, and it was the worst part of my life. To the point where in 8th grade, I was learning at home before learning at home was okay, as we experienced with COVID. I didn't want to go to school because I felt so bullied and put out to one side and kind of cast aside by peers. So I experienced ostracism to a high degree. And those students in my classroom, now I'm going to focus a little bit on this because it talks about the student environment being flawed at the school level. When I've been a teacher all these years, and I've taught K through 12, I've taught adults as well. I've taught the tiny people, preschool, pre-K, all the way up to the very top. But one thing I've noticed is teachers, and I've noticed this as an administrator and as a teacher, if a child, and I could usually understand a 2E child, I would note them in my classroom, and sure enough, I would check the record that we were allowed to do, and the child was a 2E kid. I would always ask, what is being done? What is helping this child? What has been done? What experiences has this child had? Have they had any of their learning needs addressed? And if you looked at their cum or their grades for within a span of several years, they would either be high achieving, they were bored in class, they would get straight A's, and they were great. Or they would show that they were uninterested, they did not want to do any of the work, and it was hit and miss, and you couldn't read their writing, and they had a kind of like an I don't care about my work and so forth, but yet they had areas of great ability. In science, for example, if science were being taught or social studies were being taught, or an area of interest of current events, they perk right up and be brought into the entire environment of the classroom. The flaw comes, and the disappointment of our systems right now, and it's basically the state level. And I'm going to bring up a point that have a minor insect here. A point that Amber and I talked about just prior to our starting our webinar is that the state has let everything just lapse at this point. The programs have been cut. They are not bringing it back. But I want to contrast this with at military bases. I was looking at job descriptions for teachers. They are looking for gifted teachers who have taught the gifted, but they can't find the teachers to fill the position. Why? Because most teachers are not trained in gifted education anymore. They do not receive those options anymore. They don't have the training anymore. Most school districts are keeping their head above water and trying to survive, not only long before COVID occurred. This has been going on for 20 years. So your child who, if he or she is feeling very dissatisfied in the classroom, small wonder the staff isn't trained, the resources aren't there. You have been providing the resources. You know the needs of your child. You have to continue at this point, for a lack of better words right now, is you have to continue advocating. And you have found IEA, which remains one of the, I would say, flagships of gifted education. Most programs are only given in the summertime and not throughout the school year. This is a year-round program. I'm not here to advocate and do a commercial here for IEA, but it's the truth. They are and remain the only program I know of that is year-round to meet the needs of a gifted child. So right now, your school districts are failing you. They do not have the resources. Parents often opt, and that happened in Pasadena. It wasn't uncommon for a parent to hop schools and have their child go to the best school in the district, which I would have done the same had it been my child, and hoping that there would be a potential for resources, because the reasoning, I'm sure, on the part of the parent was that the resources for gifted education would be allocated there, and they weren't allocated anymore at their best school as opposed to their worst school. So the system remains flawed, and it will continue to be that. The next highlight, it says the importance of providing twice exceptional students with adequate support and help with difficulties related to their disabilities is made clear in most of the studies. You do not have, let me rephrase this. Not only do you not have the teachers that have had access to gifted training, if your child is in a school environment, whether they're in an inclusionary status or they're in an environment where they may have aides or assistants in the classroom, they are not trained at all, very rarely, if at all. They will know which kids are the difficult kids, and they'll get some insight on how to help that child, but they have no training in giftedness. In all my 30 years in education, I have yet to see a class training teachers' aides or support staff in gifted education, or identifying or knowing what a gifted child needs. So that has been a glaring omission of the last 20 years. And it even mentions 20 years in the article that I highlighted. In the 3.4 section, there's one highlighted area. It's about in the middle of the page. And it says, twice exceptionality and how student counselors can support twice exceptional students is limited. Your counselors have been cut down in schools, ladies and gentlemen. Counseling support has been relegated to, and very justifiably, now with COVID and students returning to the classroom, and all those effects of what the pandemic has done to them emotionally and psychologically over the last year, over a year now. Those resources are going to be earmarked for that almost exclusively. You can expect that and anticipate that. They are not going to be thinking necessarily of gifted education at this point. Even in the 1970s, this is like in covered wagon days, but in the 1970s, it mentioned, it has mentioned that, in the 1970s, there was something called MGM, and it was mentally gifted minors. And anyway, they did not offer, they had the classes, but no training. And that's even when I was in high school. Okay.
Cynthia, I do have a question here from the audience.
Thank you. And I see it. And it's, I would like to address it, and it's very timely. Thank you, Sharon, for your question. It says that do colleges or universities provide training for gifted education? Yes and no. And I'll tell you the yes, and I'll tell you the no. There are no college courses offered at this point. There aren't any that are strictly in your teacher education to learn about gifted children and how to address their needs. You do take a class on students with disabilities, and it's a required class for the state of California. And in that particular class is a section that you study about gifted students. It is in the disability class that you receive any exposure to this, to these really wonderful kids. So I hope that gives you a little background. It's sad, and it's lacking in our universities. It's lacking on the state level. The one place I see a shred, a glimmer of hope is on the federal level, and that they're including and wanting teachers to teach gifted students on military bases in their classrooms. So I'm going to be perusing that a little bit myself and find out why on military bases is it being addressed and not in a school district or on the state level. And then Sharon has asked another question that says, should states focus on building schools for gifted education? That would be my dream. After 30 years plus now, really, I would say at this point, because if you have a lovely person in your life with superpowers and they're 2E, there are times where the one part of the E is more dominant than the other part of the E. And having that understood at a school where the educators are specifically targeted for helping those kids and guiding their education in that area, this would be the best path to go. Funding them, I don't know where that would come from. I'm going to speak to one, and this is again, Sharon, you're asking excellent questions. I have taught at private, public, and charter schools, and on all levels. And private schools, they vary. You have private schools that are very high profile. They perhaps demand more of their educators in the way of education. But for a private school, they can decide whether the educator has a degree, a bachelor's or not. So some of your educators do not even have a bachelor's degree or a credential. So even though they are, charging money, and like I say, there's some fine, I've worked for private schools, probably not quite a third of my career, but I've worked for them. They're very fine private schools, but the training, again, of the staff is probably on the high side of lacking for their educators. The ratio of the classrooms is helpful in some instances. They're smaller than not, but not always, but more often than not. Now, charter are often run by individuals that don't even have a background in education at all and have opened it with a wish, a hope, and a dream to target the education at a community, a need in the community. But again, their educators don't always have the full credentials and the needs of what a teacher should have. Then you go to public, which does require its educators to have a degree, a credential, testing, have taken the test, the board tests that are required, and passed a probationary period and so forth. Public schools do remain our best hope. I wish the states would fund gifted education. If they continue, and if it continues to be part of the disabilities designation, then I think that they quite honestly, gifted kids a place to be and to have their needs met. If that is the designation and that is the way it wishes to be in our educational code, then I agree with you, Sharon. They should focus on building, at least in some of our major cities. We have schools for the arts, which are important too, which have been cut. But they need to put these at least and start in our major cities and so forth, and go from there, and maybe offer ways of transportation and so forth. If I can even find out more, which I know the state of California is not starting this at this time, but if I were to find out anything, you guys would be the first to know, because I would be there in a heartbeat. So thank you again, Sharon, so much. You ask great questions. See, going on under discussion, it says in the same page, it says that, I hope I'm doing this correctly. And it says the need for teachers to have a thorough understanding of the needs of such students. Again, as I mentioned earlier in our talk, the majority of teachers focus on the behavior rather than the need. It's the reaction and the disconnect that will occur between student and teacher, and a perception of the child by that teacher that that child is either difficult, unteachable, unmanageable, instead of listening or observing what that child may need. I want to give you one statistic that is very, very important. In about between 2000 and 2010, we were told at Pasadena to expect by the year, I think they said 2020, which we just passed last year. This was before the thought of COVID even. They said that 100,000 teachers will retire, which has left a huge deficit of educators at this point, especially experienced educators. With COVID, that gap has even expanded. So more have retired, some have passed away, and some have left the profession entirely. The average stay of a teacher now in the teaching profession is 2 to 3 years at this point. Okay. There's one very prominent statement. It says, developing their skills and using their strengths. I am a huge believer in that, and that's what IEA brings out in our kids. And I have done that with my children in the classroom. I'm going to use one case in point. I had a young man. He was a fourth grader. He had Asperger syndrome. He was gifted, and he was put in inclusionary status from an SDC class. He had support with a resource teacher in the event he should need it. His one disconnect is he would not want to write at all. He would, one behavior he would actually want to hurt his head against a wall. It was very, very severe. So as he gained confidence that the moon was not expected of him, and I was modeling the writing and so forth, I gained his confidence. And I took I didn't want to encroach on his emotional fragility, because he was very emotionally fragile coming out of an SDC class into a mainstream class. So over a period of that school year, I gained his confidence. His parent was very supportive, as all of you out there are very supportive. You wouldn't be part of IEA or gifted education if you were not. And he started writing. It was a paragraph or two. It wasn't huge. It wasn't big. It wasn't grand, but he followed through and he trusted me. That bond of trust is very important between teacher and child. As fate would have it, it wasn't planned. I had the same child the following year for 5th grade. He still struggled with writing. He hated it, but he trusted me enough that I wouldn't ask more or less. It wasn't that like, okay, if I write 2 or 3 sentences, she won't ask me anymore. And amazingly, he knew to meet the challenge and even go a little bit beyond. By the end of that 2nd year I had him, all my students participated in an essay contest for the Martin Luther King Jr. essay contest for Pasadena, which I'm assuming still occurs. And I was so surprised he won. He won for the entire district. He couldn't believe it. His mother couldn't believe it. I believed in him. All I could say is I believed in him, and he spoke truth. He spoke truth when he wrote. And that voice, that inner voice came out. And with your children, I would hope that inner voice would come out through their interests. And we'll talk about that in your questions in a moment. So at the very bottom of page 8, it says the need for teachers to focus on developing their strengths. And that, as I mentioned, is an example with Chris. And Chris is his name that I gave in absentia. It is not Chris. Okay. 6 articles. I'm on the next page. 6 articles reported on qualitative studies, 5 on a mixed method. So they were both technical and not technical. And then it says of the 8 reviewed articles, it's in the middle of the page, that focused on teachers' experiences, the studies, and then I'm on the next paragraph, the studies that were conducted among teachers found that if they had undertaken appropriate courses, and that's your question, Sharon, there you go, appropriate courses, they were considered more likely to be successful in meeting the needs of gifted students. So those courses per se as giftedness do not exist. Then it mentions toward the end, 2 studies reported that teachers tend to focus more often on students' weaknesses than on their strengths. And then it goes on to say they emphasize there's a need that teacher emphasizes understanding individual strengths and developing awareness of their current level of functioning. So if you have a child, for example, in your classroom, and he or she is writing something that maybe he or she is upper elementary and he or she is writing like barely 2nd grade, that doesn't mean that child is not functioning at a higher level just based on the writing. Another case in point, a young man I had that had dysgraphia, which he could not write. He could tell you everything. He could fill in multiple choice. He could do math, but he could not write. He could tell you everything. He came to me testing at second semester kindergarten. I trusted it's that bond of trust that a teacher has. If teachers don't trust their kids, no, not when to trust them all the time, but when to trust them and to build confidence, it does get better. Example with this young man, he was doing kindergarten second semester in the third grade. I got him in the fourth grade. He was still kindergarten second semester. I gave his tests orally, and his math was okay. He was functioning with that. He had to have his test read to him, and I would do the bubbling in. And at the end, he was pulling B's and C's in class. At the end, my administrator asked that he be taken out of my classroom to receive his achievement test with another instructor that he did not like very much. And that I was very worried about him, but I had no voice in the matter. He was tested with that other instructor, and no one came to me with the results. I had to go pursue them. And I looked up his cum, and by the end of that particular academic year in fourth grade, he had gone up from kindergarten second semester. He got up to the point of third grade first semester, just doing the accommodation that had not been done before of reading his test to him and helping him write things or his thoughts out, so that he can have his own voice be heard and his true academics be measured. So prior to me, they were evaluating him without pulling out his strengths. And that's what that part of the article discusses. On the last page, it mentions, and this is a summation, and it says, first, programs of initial teacher education and in-service education must address the limited knowledge of twice exceptional students that was reported in the studies. This is the finding of this article. And it says these programs need to extend their work on children with disabilities, gifts, and talents to include the education of twice exceptional students. There is nothing at this point outside of these articles, and having a short chapter taught in a disabilities class, there is nothing in our education of educators to get them on board with what we are advocating, that students be met at their strengths and not their weaknesses. So I hope this article kind of summates this. This saves you from reading tons of other articles from the last 20 years. The other thing, now, Amber, I'm going to toggle in here for a minute. And I know we talked about the 3 areas of questions. And hold on. I'm trying to find my notes. Sorry, guys. There they are. Okay. So, Amber, could I impose on you to name the 3 major areas?
Yes. So those 3 areas were how to motivate your kids and manage frustration, district management of GATE, which we covered a little bit, and resources. And resources was very broad.
Right. And thank you. Your babies, your wonderful children are, in the list of the questions that came through to me, and I feel like, and then Amber, we're going to talk about how these will be addressed post-webinar, but because I feel like reaching out to each and every one of you and answering your questions, because they're all so relevant and so necessary. You talked about motivation and frustration. There are so many factors that occur to cause a child to react to you, to have a shutdown, to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to focus. I want to do my video games. I want to do this. I want to do that. A twice exceptional child or a gifted child has, I don't know how to explain it. I had a psychologist explain it to me one time, and it has stuck with me ever since, that all of us, we have our physical bodies, then we have our emotional selves, our psychological selves, then our emotional self, which is like a yolk, if you think of it as an egg. For a twice exceptional child or gifted child, that yolk, which is think of it like a typical egg that you crack or boil or have a hard-boiled egg, is larger in the egg. And every time the white or the white part of the egg rubs on it, that's their sensitivity. It is very acute. So when you get pushback from your little one or your big one, and they're dissatisfied with what you're asking to do, even to try something for 2 seconds, it's that sensitivity. Some of it is they're teenagers, yes, but more so when that sensitivity is aggravated, it feels like sandpaper. And I speak from personal experience. It literally feels like sandpaper on your soul. And it doesn't mean, no, wow, I can't touch them or, approach them with anything. There are, and this is something I would like to do in a subsequent webinar, is actually go through the techniques to help an obstinate child that is gifted and how to approach that sensitivity. So I know that doesn't completely answer each and every question, but I would like to, number one, we'll discuss how to reach out to the, further discuss to reach out to these questions, but also I would personally like to address these sensitivities and how to react to them in real time, and do some role play. Perhaps maybe I could borrow Amber in a role play situation there. Then district management and GATE, as I've mentioned through quite a bit, because you are partners with your school, and your partner has been letting you down. And it's like a marriage. When you have one faction of your marriage is not doing their part, you're going to have more work to do, which is why you're finding more gifted education for your child or their needs to be met. So that reach out, do advocate, don't stop. That would almost fall under resources of who to write to, who to advocate to, where do you go to advocate, to get this heard, to get this done, to get the funding, to find out what is going on, how much is allocated. I can give you those resources, and that goes from district management and so forth. But right now, your district is not training personnel. They promise high-level courses in mathematics. Of course, in high school, you have AP classes. You have some students that will go to junior college, start taking classes, and then they go on and use those units to go to college. That is their answer right now for gifted education. It's more like, I see a good question. Hang on a minute. I see Abby's. Hang on, Abby. I see them just reaching for this, and let's just go and put them in a higher level course. That'll take care of that gifted kid. It doesn't all the time. They may get into a higher level course, say they give them calculus, and they flew through Algebra 2 and everything, trig, whatever, they're doing great. Geometry was nothing. Algebra 1 was nothing. And then they take pre-calc and they get into calc, and then something happens. And sometimes it's exhaustion. It could be emotional. And sometimes sometimes it's taken for granted that a gifted kid is only book smart, and that's not always true. So Abby, you came up with a question, and I'm just going to read it out if I may. It says, how do we bring awareness of twice exceptional tag students in school? My son, okay. And he stutters. Okay, I've never heard twice exceptional student until I encountered, okay. Thank you for your work. Okay, thank you for being there and caring about your son. You even know that our current president, he has had a stuttering issue as a young man, and he still struggles with it. His emotion, just like I mentioned a minute ago, think of that egg. And your son he stutters because he's trying to get the words out, and his thoughts are racing ahead of him, and he can't make the two cooperate. And his emotions are very high. And his little yolk is even almost touching the top of the white. So that anxiety is huge. I honor you that you love your son, and I'm glad you're there for him, and I'm glad you're here with us. But you asked your initial question, how you bring awareness of twice exceptional students in school. Okay. I'm going to be very frank here. And that is, you have good administrators like good teachers, and you have bad administrators like bad teachers. I'm not going to talk about the bad ones. We know how they function. Let's talk about a good one, or what you would believe to be a good administrator. They are, I'm not making excuses, but this is just the nature of the beast, is that, how can I put it? They have to work in a very sort of an ecosystem where they have administration to please, they have parents they need to address, they have students, they have the community. And with the busy paperwork that they have them doing and focus on test scores, they professionally, they have put this on the back burner for themselves. And most of your administrators don't have this background either. They would have to be, I'm going to say something about myself, as old as I am, to literally have experienced gifted education. So getting back again to your question, to bring awareness, I think I'm going to speak very boldly here. And this is something I brought up with Amber, and bless her for being there and inviting me to do this. I know there's a group on Facebook, there are IEAs on Facebook. There probably are gifted groups online and so forth, but there is no advocacy group. For example, horrible things, the school shootings occur, and there's advocacy groups that are necessary for those issues. There's no advocacy group that is on a political level to advocate for gifted education. It does not exist. So perhaps through this would be a beginning and a segue to start advocacy, which if IEA wouldn't mind me addressing that in the future, I would like to show you specifically how to advocate as a group, if that would be amenable to you out there. So, Abby, I think kids, as your son he's marginalized by what people see, not what people know. And that is so sad because that is so true. And but I would like to start an advocacy corps if that would be amenable with your guidance or whatever IEA thinks is proper to do. I would love to do it. It's just not been done. And then resources. Now, some of the resource questions that I received had to do with academic resources and resources for help and so forth. There's one more point I want to bring up before I bring this to some sort of conclusion. The curriculum that is out there right now, ladies and gentlemen, is earmarked in 3 ways, or actually 4. You have English language learners that have to have a support. There's reteaching. There is an advanced component, but it's not marked for GATE. It is, again, as I mentioned, say your child's exceptional in mathematics, so they keep pushing them up in math. That doesn't address their capability of, say, doing tech or creating tech or that creativity. It is not there. There's no components right now. There used to be. There isn't right now. The one thing I wanted to bring up also, and that's a resource and also what districts are doing, and that is when they test them, and some of you mentioned what grade your child received testing in GATE. In Pasadena, and I'll just speak from personal experience, it varies from district to district. The tests are housed in the special education department. The district will decide what grade levels will be tested. So say, for example, your child went to a different school for K-1-2, and they go to another school in 3rd grade. And you find out from the teacher or the administrator that they tested 3rd grade last year. They're not going to do it again. They arbitrarily just pretty much, this year we're going to do 1st and 3rd. This year we're going to do 5th and 4th. They hop around. You'll entirely miss the cycle if you're not there a certain year, or if your child misses the day that the GATE test is given, they won't get it. They won't receive it. Then I'm going to answer one question that talked about what defines exceptionality. How can a child be defined as not exceptional, gifted? 3 ways. And I was told this by a highly trained, gifted educator that has retired a long time ago. There are 3 ways. Number 1, academics. Are they high? If not high, are they consistent? They could even be BC, not failing, but can show some consistency in how he or she does their work year to year. Number 2, how are their achievement scores? Are they testing above the average percentile? Not necessarily the top 10, but above the average. Then the one criteria that often, I'm sorry to say, eliminates children from being identified as GATE or to be advanced into GATE is maturity. If the child shows a lack of maturity, they will say he or she can't possibly advance or be classified as GATE if their emotional structure is immature, which is not fair, is wrong, because many students not only perform well academically, they perform well on tests. Some kids are awful test takers, though, too. If they have an off day, they'll do terrible. Doesn't mean they can't pass it, but if they're okay with the paper pencil stuff, they go, oh, wow, they do really well. Well, he or she really shouldn't be engaged because they have outbursts or they have temper tantrums or something disqualifies them, and they will just put them out of mind. I had so many students that unfortunately I had to disappoint, not by my criteria, but by what the district or the school designated as gifted. But I know I covered motivation, frustration a little bit. I've done resources just a little bit. I would love to go into more depth about curriculum and where to find those little nuggets of pleasure for gifted education. They are out there, but you kind of have to dig for them so that it's not just more paperwork for you or your child. Those resources are there, but you have to dig. The district right now, the only solution I can come up with is some advocacy. And the advocacy or a regular webinar or a podcast, I think would be the best form of tact to take this to another level. But Amber, I'm going to kick it back to you. I know I ran a little overtime, but I hope I covered.
I didn't want to interrupt you.
No.
We covered a lot of territory. Thank you so much for your insight and sharing your expertise and your personal encounters that you've had with giftedness and 2E communities. We have a lot coming out of this. I will be following up with those of you who are here right now with an email. I will be sharing some of the resources that we mentioned, as well as the original document we used for the PowerPoint. So that'll be coming to you, as well as with a link to this video. So you'll get all of that from me in an email. And there's a question here from Dawn. Hi, Dawn. Talking about advocating at schools. Dawn did a great job, so we could talk about that too. Your question was, sorry, the chat went away. I talked too much.
Do you want me to read it?
Would it be possible for you, Cynthia, to email some of your resources and recommendations? So yes, we will collaborate and get that email out to you guys, definitely. It probably won't happen tomorrow, so just to set your expectations for the end of the week, I'll get those out to you guys. And then we also had some topic ideas come up, techniques for approaching sensitivity, asking the question, how does your state identify? And I want to add in and define giftedness. Every state is different with how they identify and define. So there's an area there we can look into. And advocacy. So we can share some resources on advocacy and as well maybe talk about how we can organize and collaborate on advocacy. Mm-hmm. For the gifted support group in general, we run through the school year. So June is our last support group for this school year. We'll be starting back up in August. So when I email out to the group, I might have a couple extra questions in there that if you guys are so inclined to answer, I would appreciate it for input for next season. So you might get some of that in the email as well. And if you have any ideas on what you'd like to hear more of, on what's happening with your kid in the classroom, what you need support with, please feel free to email me that as well. We want to make sure we're meeting you guys where you're at and giving resources that are really relevant to you. So thank you so much for your questions. Again, Cynthia and I will be reaching out via email, following up on these. Otherwise, have a great evening. Thank you all so much for being here. I see one more quick question. It's a thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Sharon. You're awesome.
Have a good night.
Philip.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye now.